Please, marry me." The words did not echo. They didn't need to. They landed heavy and flat in the middle of the Fresh Mart parking lot, as if the asphalt itself had absorbed them. Carts stood abandoned between faded white lines. A delivery truck idled near the loading dock, its engine humming low, impatient. Somewhere a phone chimed with an incoming notification, then another, then several more, as people slowly realized they were witnessing something that did not belong to their ordinary Tuesday evening. Malik Johnson tightened his grip on the broom handle. The plastic was warm from his hands, slick with the day's sweat. He did not look down at the woman right away. Instead, his eyes moved instinctively across the scene. The black Bentley stopped crooked across two spaces, the cluster of shoppers frozen mid-step, the glowing rectangles already rising in the air as phones began to record. Then he looked at her. She was on her knees. Not awkwardly, not theatrically, but with a stillness that suggested intention. Her coat, camel wool tailored, brushed the gritty pavement. One knee pressed down harder than the other. Her hands were clasped not in prayer but in restraint, as if she were holding herself together. "Do you know what you're asking for?" Malik said. His voice did not carry. It didn't need to. The people closest leaned in. The ones farther away turned their bodies, angling their phones for a better view. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with the same careful distance he used on malfunctioning machines or angry customers. "Do I look like a joke to you?" A murmur rippled outward. Someone laughed sharp and nervous. Someone else whispered her name. Evelyn Hart looked up at him. Her eyes were red, not from tears, but from something deeper, something that had been burning for a while. "No," she said. "You don't." The name Evelyn Hart meant something in this city. It meant glass towers in Back Bay quarterly earnings calls, broadcast on business channels, keynote speeches delivered with calm authority. It meant Hartwell Analytics, the company whose algorithms shaped insurance approvals and hospital staffing models across half the country. It meant power, the quiet kind that didn't need to announce itself. Here on her knees in Dorchester, it meant confusion. Malik glanced again at the phones. He could see his own reflection in one of them, distorted by a cracked screen, a black man in a gray uniform. Vest, the Fresh Mart logo fraying at the edges, a name badge scratched so badly the letters were barely legible. He had learned long ago what it meant to be seen like this, flattened frame stripped of context. "Stand up," he said, not unkindly. Evelyn didn't move. "I said, stand up," he repeated. "If you're going to say something like that, you don't say it from the ground." That earned another ripple, louder this time. A man near the entrance muttered, "Damn." Someone else said, "Is this real?" The delivery truck shut off its engine. Slowly, Evelyn rose. She brushed off her coat without looking down, her movements precise, controlled. When she stood, she was shorter than Malik had expected. He noticed that before he noticed anything else. "My name is Evelyn," she said, as if he didn't already know. "I know," Malik replied. "You've been coming here for 3 weeks." That stopped her. "You noticed?" "I notice a lot," he said. He rested the broom against his shoulder the way he always did when a conversation was about to last longer than it should. "You come in around 6. You buy the same things. You pretend you're deciding between brands you don't care about. You watch people when you think no one's watching you." A few heads turned toward Evelyn now, curious, recalibrating. She swallowed. "I wasn't pretending." "Sure you were," Malik said. "Everybody pretends in places like this. It's easier." He could feel the familiar tension building in his chest. The old instinct to disengage, to step back into the invisible space he had perfected over the years. But something about the way she stood there, unshielded, unguarded, kept him rooted. "You asked me a question," Evelyn said. "About whether you look like a joke." "Yes." "No," she said again more firmly. You don't. That's the problem. The air shifted. Malik felt it before he understood it. This was no longer about spectacle. It was about intent. Say what you came to say, he told her, and say it like you mean it. She took a breath. I want to marry you. A woman near the cart return gasped. Someone behind Malik let out a low whistle. Malik waited. He had learned patience the hard way. And he said, And I know how this looks, Evelyn continued. I know what people think they're seeing. I know what they'll say. But I'm not here to rescue you. I'm here because I can't keep living the way I've been living, knowing what I know. Seeing what I've seen and doing nothing about it. And marrying me fixes that, Malik asked. No, she said. It commits me. That word landed differently. Commitment. Not charity, not guilt. Something binding. Malik shifted his weight. His knee ached. It always did when the weather was about to turn. He thought of his brother Darius, sitting in a concrete room with a narrow window that faced nothing but sky. He thought of the letter he hadn't answered yet, folded and unfolded. So many times the paper had gone soft. You want a husband? He said. Or you want a symbol? I want a partner, Evelyn replied. And I want the truth. Then here's mine, Malik said. He turned slightly so the phones caught his profile, not his face. He had learned how angles worked, how narratives formed. If you're serious, if this isn't a story you plan to walk away from when it costs too much, then there's a price. Her jaw tightened. Name it. He met her eyes again. My brother was convicted of a crime he didn't commit. 6 years ago. Warehouse fire. No investigation worth the name. Wrong place, wrong skin, wrong time. He's still inside. A hush settled deeper now, heavier. I want that case reopened. Malik continued. Not quietly, not through favors. Out in the open. I want your lawyers, your influence, your name attached to it. I want you standing next to me when people start asking why. Evelyn nodded once, slow. Okay. I'm not finished, he said. If we do this, you don't get to step aside when it gets ugly. When your board gets nervous, when your stock dips. You stand there and you take it. I will. And if we ever marry, Malik added, his voice steady, half of whatever comes out of this book, deals, speeches, whatever noise people make, we put into a fund. Legal defense. Wrongful convictions. It doesn't carry your name. It doesn't carry mine. It belongs to the people who never had a chance. Evelyn didn't answer right away. The phones held steady. The city seemed to lean closer. Finally, she said, Yes. Malik searched her face, looking for hesitation calculation. He found none that mattered. Then get back in your car, he said. Because if you stay here any longer, this turns into something it doesn't need to be. She nodded. As she turned toward the Bentley, a path opened without anyone quite realizing they had stepped aside. Malik picked up his broom. As the engine started and the car eased out of the lot, he felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones. This wasn't love. Not yet. This was something harder, something older. Behind him, the parking lot slowly exhaled. Conversations resumed. Carts rolled again. But nothing felt the same. Malik pushed his broom forward, already knowing that the life he had built around being unseen had just ended. If you've ever seen someone being judged solely because of their skin color or social status, please like and leave a comment. Are you on Evelyn's or Malik's side? And remember to subscribe to the channel to support justice. By the time Evelyn Hart reached her townhouse in Back Bay, the city had already begun to reinterpret what had happened in the Fresh Mart parking lot. Notifications stacked on her phone like unread verdicts. She didn't open any of them. She left the device face down on the kitchen counter next to a bowl of oranges she never remembered to eat and stood very still, listening to the quiet. The house was too large for two people too polished to feel lived in. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood, the kind of place designed to impress visitors who never stayed long enough to notice how lonely it was. "Ava," she called. In my room, her daughter answered, voice muffled, already guarded. Evelyn slipped off her shoes and walked down the hallway, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome, counting time she could never get back. Ava's door was half open. The girl sat cross-legged on her bed, earbuds in tablet balanced on her knees. She looked up when Evelyn leaned against the doorframe. "You're late," Ava said. "I know, you always say that." Evelyn nodded. She didn't offer an excuse. At 46, she had learned that explanations often sounded like lies, even when they weren't. She watched her daughter for a moment, taking in the familiar details. She somehow still felt she was learning the way Ava's hair curled stubbornly at the ends, the faint crease between her brows that appeared when she was thinking too hard. "Did you eat?" Evelyn asked. Ava shrugged. "There's pasta in the fridge. I'll warm it up." "No, it's fine." Ava pulled one earbud free. "Are you okay?" The question landed softly, but it carried weight. Evelyn considered how much truth a child could bear and decided, as she often did, to offer something in between. "I had a strange day." Ava studied her. "Strange like bad, strange like important," Evelyn said. That earned her a skeptical look. Ava replaced the earbud. The conversation was over. Evelyn stood there another second, then turned back toward the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water and drank it slowly, grounding herself in the ordinary act. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Somewhere, a neighbor laughed. The city went on indifferent to the private tremor running through her. She thought of Malik's voice, calm, unimpressed. The way he had said, "Do you know what you're asking for?" as if he were the one with something to lose. She had built an empire on decisiveness, on the ability to see patterns others missed and move before they did. But this had not been a calculation. It had been a recognition. Evelyn carried her glass into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, careful not to crease the cushions. The space was immaculate, curated. A framed photograph sat on the side table, her and Daniel taken years ago on the Cape, windblown and laughing. He had been gone nearly 5 years now, his disappearance a quiet wound the world had eventually stopped asking about. No body, no answers, just absence. The kind of loss that never quite settled into grief because it refused to be named. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. At Hartwell Analytics, the night shift would be running their final checks. Servers humming in temperature-controlled rooms, data flowing clean and fast, stripped of faces and names. Evelyn had always trusted numbers. They didn't lie. Or so she had believed. She closed her eyes and saw the internal report again, the one she had skimmed months ago and flagged for later. Bias anomalies. Disparities too consistent to dismiss as noise. At the time, she had told herself it needed more review, more context. There would be time. There was always time, until suddenly there wasn't. The doorbell rang. Evelyn opened her eyes. She didn't move right away. The bell rang again, sharper this time. When she opened the door, Graham Weller stood on her stoop. Coat-buttoned expression carefully neutral. He had been her CFO for 8 years. Reliable, unflappable. The kind of man who prided himself on never being surprised. "You should turn on the news," he said. "I'm aware," Evelyn replied. Graham glanced past her into the house. "May I come in now?" He hesitated, then nodded. "The board is convening an emergency call. Investors are spooked. The narrative is getting away from us." "From you," Evelyn corrected. His jaw tightened. This isn't a game. I know. You don't, Graham said, his voice dropping. You think you do because you've never been wrong before. But this is different. Optics matter. So does substance. Substance doesn't trade at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Evelyn met his gaze. What are you asking me to do? Clarify, he said. Distance. Make it clear this was a misunderstanding, a stunt, something emotional that got out of hand. And Malik, she asked. Graham didn't blink. Who? The word hit harder than she expected. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. You've seen him, she said. In the footage. I've seen a risk, Graham replied. And risks get managed. By erasing them. By minimizing exposure. Evelyn stepped back and closed the door. The click echoed in the hallway. She stood there, hands still on the knob, breathing through the surge of anger that threatened to break her composure. This was the part she knew well. The pressure. The narrowing of options. The subtle insistence that the easiest path was the only rational one. She walked upstairs to her bedroom and changed out of her clothes, folding them with mechanical precision. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked tired, older, not diminished, but stripped of something she had been carrying like armor. Her phone buzzed again. This time she picked it up. A text from an unknown number. Just 4 words. He doesn't belong here. Evelyn stared at the screen. She didn't need to ask who had sent it. She typed a response, then erased it. Typed again, erased again. Finally, she set the phone down. In Ava's room, a light flicked off. Evelyn listened to the quiet settle the house, pulling inward around its occupants. She thought of Malik pushing his broom across the parking lot, already absorbing the consequences of a choice he hadn't even made yet. She moved to her desk and opened her laptop. The familiar interface greeted her, clean and orderly. She navigated to the folders she had avoided for months and opened the report. The charts loaded. The patterns emerged. Clearer now, sharper, undeniable. This ends, she murmured, though she wasn't sure what she meant by it. Outside, Boston slept, unaware that something had shifted. Evelyn Hart sat alone in the glow of her screen, finally doing what she had always claimed to value most, looking directly at the truth, no matter what it cost. Malik Johnson clocked out at 10:17 p.m., the same way he always did, by sliding his badge through the scanner and waiting for the soft beep that confirmed the system still knew who he was. The screen flashed his name for a brief second before returning to blank, as if embarrassed to linger. He hung his vest on the hook inside the janitor's closet, straightened it out of habit, and stepped back into the fluorescent wash of the hallway. Fresh Mart at night had a different rhythm. The aisles were wider. The noise dropped to a hum. People moved with less performance, more fatigue. He pushed his cart toward the exit wheels, rattling faintly over the seams in the floor. The automatic doors opened with a sigh, releasing him into the cool air. The parking lot was mostly empty now, the earlier crowd reduced to scattered vehicles and the occasional employee lingering to smoke. The spot where the Bentley had been was just another stretch of cracked pavement again, nothing to mark it as the place where his life had quietly split in two. Malik walked the 6 blocks home instead of taking the bus. He always did. The walk gave his thoughts somewhere to go. Dorchester at night was a patchwork of porch lights and shadows of houses that leaned slightly with age, but still held together. He passed the corner store where the owner nodded at him through the glass, a recognition built over years of small, consistent exchanges. He passed the church with the peeling white steps, the one his mother had dragged them to every Sunday when they were boys, back when she still believed faith was a shield. His apartment sat above a closed barber shop, the sign faded enough that the red and blue stripes looked gray in the dim streetlight. Inside the space was narrow but orderly. Malik kicked off his boots by the door and turned on the lamp. The light revealed the same careful arrangement it always did. A couch that had seen better decades, a small table with two mismatched chairs, a bookshelf lined with manuals and old textbooks whose spines had softened from use. He poured himself a glass of water and drank it standing up. The quiet pressed in, thick and familiar. On the counter lay a stack of envelopes, all with the same return address stamped in the corner. He picked up the top one, feeling the weight of it, before opening it, as if the paper itself carried gravity. The letter was written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Darius always wrote like he was trying to convince someone of something. Big brother, it began. They always started that way. Malik sat down at the table, the chair creaking under his weight, and read slowly. Darius wrote about the library cart that came by on Wednesdays, about the man in the next cell who snored so loud it rattled the vent, about a new guard who didn't look at them like they were already guilty of whatever came next. There was no mention of hope. There never was. Hope, Malik had learned, was a dangerous thing to put on paper. At the bottom, Darius had added a line that hadn't been there in the last letter. I heard something might be changing. Don't get my hopes up unless it's real. Malik folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling, at the faint water stain shaped like a continent he couldn't quite name. He had told Evelyn the truth in the parking lot, but he hadn't told her everything. He hadn't told her how many nights he had sat exactly like this, replaying the trial in his head, wondering which word, which pause, which missed opportunity had tipped the scales. He hadn't told her how justice, once delayed long enough, started to feel like a language he no longer spoke. He stood and crossed to the bookshelf, pulling down a thick binder from the bottom shelf. Inside were copies of court documents, newspaper clippings yellowed at the edges, handwritten notes in the margins. He had stopped adding to it years ago after realizing that knowing the system intimately didn't make it fairer. It just made its patterns clearer. Justice isn't blind, he thought, the old bitterness rising. It just chooses who to see. A knock sounded at the door. Malik froze, his hand still on the binder. No one knocked this late. He closed the binder and set it back in place before moving to the door. He didn't turn on the overhead light. He looked through the peephole. Mrs. Alvarez stood in the hallway, her gray hair pulled back tight, a grocery bag hanging from her arm. She lived 2 doors down and treated Malik with the quiet authority of someone who had decided long ago to take responsibility for the people around her. "You eat?" she asked when he opened the door. "Sometimes," Malik said. She handed him the bag. Inside was a container wrapped in foil, still warm. "You look thinner." "I'm fine." She studied him for a moment, her eyes sharp. "I saw you on my phone." Malik exhaled. "That was quick." "The world is quick now," she said. "Be careful. People like stories more than they like truth." He nodded. "I know." Mrs. Alvarez turned to leave, then paused. "Whatever you're doing," she added, "do it clean. Don't let them make you small." After she left, Malik closed the door and leaned his forehead against it for a second longer than necessary. He carried the food to the table and ate slowly, tasting more memory than flavor. His mother's kitchen had smelled like this, like garlic and patience. Later, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his phone. No messages, no missed calls. He hadn't given Evelyn his number. She hadn't asked. That, more than anything, unsettled him. Power usually reached for control immediately. The absence of it felt like a test. He lay back and closed his eyes. Images surfaced, uninvited Darius in his graduation cap, grinning wide. The warehouse engulfed in flames on the evening news. The courtroom too cold, too quiet. And then Evelyn, kneeling on the pavement, asking for something she couldn't possibly understand. Malik opened his eyes and sat up. He reached for a notebook on the nightstand and flipped it open to a blank page. He wrote one sentence, slowly pressing hard enough that the pen nearly tore the paper. "If this is real, it will hurt." He closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. In the dark, the city breathed around him, unaware that a man who had spent years choosing invisibility had just stepped into the most dangerous kind of light. Morning came too early, and when it did, it arrived already sharpened. Malik felt it before he saw it, the pressure in the air, the way the city seemed to lean forward, waiting. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, then buzzed again, insistent now, no longer polite. He let it vibrate until it stopped, then reached for it and turned the screen face down. The quiet returned thin and temporary. By 8:30, the Fresh Mart parking lot had become a destination. News vans lined the street where school buses usually idled. A producer paced near the cart return, rehearsing questions to no one in particular. Malik approached from the side, his hood pulled up more out of habit than fear. He could feel the eyes on him before he saw the cameras turn. He stopped short of the entrance and watched the choreography unfold. Microphones raised red lights blinking on people adjusting their posture as if preparing to be someone else. Evelyn arrived without sirens. The Bentley rolled in slow and deliberate, stopping where it had the night before, as if the pavement itself had been marked. She stepped out alone. No assistance, no security. She wore a dark coat this time, unadorned, her hair pulled back. She looked smaller in daylight, less myth, more woman. Malik noted that before he noted the cameras swing toward her. He didn't move to meet her. He waited. That too was a choice. She crossed the space between them with measured steps, ignoring the shouted questions. When she reached him, she didn't touch his arm. She didn't lower her voice. "Are you ready?" she asked. "For what?" Malik replied. "For people to misunderstand you on purpose." He exhaled once. That started yesterday. A reporter called out, "Miss Hart, is this a publicity stunt?" Another shouted. "Sir, how much is she paying you?" The questions overlapped, sharpened by familiarity. Malik felt the old instinct rise, the urge to disappear into the nearest shadow. He held his ground. "This is where we stop pretending," he said, loud enough to carry. The noise faltered. Not silence, but a thinning like static losing its signal. Malik turned to Evelyn. "You asked me a question last night," he said. "About whether you look like a joke to me." I didn't answer it fully. She watched him, her face unreadable. "So I'll answer it now," he continued. "You don't. But if this is going to be real, it doesn't get to be clean." A microphone edged closer. Malik didn't flinch. I said I had conditions. I wasn't bargaining. I was telling the truth. He faced the cameras, then not with anger, but with something steadier. "My brother Darius Johnson was convicted 6 years ago for a warehouse fire he didn't start. The investigation was rushed. The evidence was thin. The conclusion was convenient. He's still inside." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Names were typed, searches were run. "I'm asking for that case to be reopened," Malik said. "Publicly, with accountability, not favors, not backroom deals." He paused, letting it land. "And I'm asking Ms. Hart to stand with me while it happens. Not behind me, not above me, with me." Evelyn stepped closer, aligning herself at his side. She didn't speak yet. The choice spoke for her. "And if this becomes something more," Malik added his voice, "even any attention, any money, any opportunity that comes from it, will go toward people like my brother, toward legal defense, toward cases no one wants to touch. It won't carry my name. It won't carry hers." A reporter pushed forward. "Ms. Hart, are you agreeing to this? Evelyn looked straight into the lens. Yes. Even if it costs you your company, yes. Even if your board objects, yes. A beat. Why Evelyn didn't hesitate. Because I've benefited from systems I didn't question hard enough, she said. And because commitment isn't real, unless it costs something. The question surged again louder now, but the shape of the moment had changed. Malik felt it, the subtle shift from spectacle to substance. He caught Evelyn's eye just briefly. She nodded once. That's all Malik said. We're done here. They turned together, moving toward the Bentley. The crowd parted reluctantly, like a tide held back by something heavier than curiosity. As the car doors closed and the engine started, Malik allowed himself one long breath. The city receded through the tinted glass, its noise dulled but not gone. Inside the car, Evelyn rested her hands in her lap. You didn't warn me about the last part, she said. I warned you, Malik replied. I didn't rehearse you. A corner of her mouth lifted. Fair. The car pulled into traffic. Malik watched the streets pass familiar corners, blurring into something new. He felt no triumph, no relief. Only the weight of inevitability. This was not a proposal. It was a line crossed. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. You just declared war. He showed it to Evelyn. She read it and nodded. They always call it that when they're afraid. Are you? Malik asked. She considered the question. Yes, she said. But I'm not backing out. The Bentley merged onto the avenue, carrying them away from the parking lot, away from the illusion that this could be contained. Malik leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engine steady him. He thought of Darius, of the long years measured in letters and silence. He thought of the notebook by his bed, of the sentence he'd written in the dark. If this is real, it will hurt. The car turned toward the river, the skyline rising ahead, indifferent and immense. Malik opened his eyes. This was no longer about being seen. It was about refusing to look away. The lobby of Hartwell Analytics did not smell like power. It smelled like citrus cleaner and filtered air, the neutral scent of places designed to erase the people who passed through them. Malik noticed that first. He noticed the polished stone floors that reflected the ceiling lights too perfectly, the security desk positioned just far enough from the doors to feel polite but close enough to feel watchful, the subtle hush that settled as conversations lowered themselves in the presence of money. Evelyn walked beside him, not ahead, not behind. That detail mattered more than she knew. Her badge opened the turnstile with a soft click. Malik's visitor badge, freshly printed, hung heavier against his chest than it should have. Temporary. The word glared up at him in bold letters. Heads turned as they moved through the lobby. Some were curious. Some were practiced in indifference. A few held something sharper. Something Malik had learned to recognize long before he had words for it. Assessment. Categorization. Where does he fit, and how quickly can we put him there? They entered the elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing them in a box of glass and steel. Numbers climbed. Neither of them spoke. Malik watched the reflection of their faces in the mirrored wall. Two lives that did not belong in the same frame, now sharing one. You don't have to stay, Evelyn said quietly, eyes still forward. Yes, I do, Malik replied. If I leave now, they get to decide what this was. The elevator stopped on the 32nd floor. The doors opened onto a wide corridor lined with glass offices. Beyond them, the city stretched out sharp and bright in the morning light. Hartwell Analytics occupied an entire wing. Workstations arranged in neat rows, screens filled with graphs and code. People moving with purpose, or at least the appearance of it. Conversation dipped as they passed. Evelyn led him to a conference room near the center of the floor. Inside, a long table gleamed beneath recessed lighting. A carafe of water sat untouched. Malik took a seat at the far end, deliberately not choosing the place closest to her. He set his hands on the table, palms down, grounding himself. Within minutes, they began to arrive. Men and women in tailored suits, expressions carefully composed. Some nodded at Evelyn. Others didn't look at Malik at all. One man did briefly, his gaze flicking down to Malik's shoes before sliding away. Malik met it without flinching. Graham Weller entered last. He closed the door behind him and took a seat opposite Malik, folding his hands as if in prayer. His eyes were calm, professional, unreadable. "Let's get started," Graham said. "We're short on time." Evelyn leaned forward. "This isn't a board meeting." "It became one when you turned our parking lot into a press conference," Graham replied. Malik watched the exchange, cataloging tone and posture the way he once had with data sets. Patterns emerged quickly when you knew what to look for. "You said you'd stand with me," Malik said, not raising his voice. Evelyn didn't look away from Graham. "I am." Graham smiled thinly. Standing is symbolic. Decisions are operational. "Then operate," Malik said. A pause. A few people shifted in their seats. Graham opened a folder. "Mr. Johnson," he began, "we appreciate your passion. But there are protocols. You don't have clearance. You don't have context. You certainly don't have authority." Malik nodded once. "You're right. I don't have authority. I have evidence." That earned him a few looks. "I've spent years working with systems," Malik continued. "Not just cleaning around them. Systems leave trails. Bias leaves fingerprints. Your models didn't fail by accident." Evelyn turned to him, surprised. He hadn't told her how much he knew. He had chosen this moment. Graham's smile tightened. "You're making accusations you can't substantiate." "I can," Malik said, "if you give me access." Silence settled. The city beyond the glass seemed suddenly very far away. Evelyn spoke. "Give him a temporary credential." Graham's head snapped toward her. "Evelyn." "Do it," she said. "Or explain to the board why you refused transparency." A beat passed. Then another. Graham nodded once curt. 2 hours. Read only. "That's enough," Malik said. They moved to an open workstation near the edge of the floor. Someone cleared it quickly, too quickly, as if proximity carried risk. Malik sat and woke the screen. The interface was familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. He had missed this more than he admitted. The logic. The clarity. The way numbers told stories if you listened long enough. He began to work. Time compressed. Data sets opened and layered. Filters applied. Variables adjusted. Malik moved with quiet confidence, his hands steady, his focus complete. Around him, the office resumed its low hum, though the glances continued. He felt Evelyn's presence nearby, watching without interrupting. Patterns emerged fast. Approval rates skewed. Risk scores inflated for certain zip codes, disparities too clean to be random. "This," Malik said, finally turning the screen toward Evelyn. "This is what I mean." She leaned in. Her face changed as she took it in. Not shock, recognition. Graham stepped closer, his jaw tight. "Those are correlations." "No," Malik replied. "They're decisions disguised as math." He tapped the screen. "This variable here, it weights prior claims history without accounting for access bias. People with less access to preventive care file more claims. The system reads that as higher risk. It punishes poverty and calls it prediction." A murmur rippled through the nearby desks. Someone swiveled in their chair to look. Evelyn straightened. "How long has this been in production?" Graham didn't answer. How long, she repeated. Since before the IPO, he said finally. The words landed with weight. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had settled into place. This stops, she said. We freeze the model. You can't, Graham snapped. Contracts I can, Evelyn said, and I will. Graham turned to Malik. You've made your point. No, Malik said. I've made the first one. He saved the outputs, careful to leave an audit trail. Transparency was protection. He stood feeling the eyes on him again, but this time they were different. Less dismissive, more wary. As they walked back toward the elevator, Evelyn spoke softly. You didn't tell me you could do that. You didn't ask, Malik replied. The elevator doors closed. The city dropped away as they descended. Are you still sure, Malik asked. Evelyn looked at the numbers scrolling through her mind, at the cost already tallying itself. Yes, she said. Now I am. When the doors opened onto the lobby, Malik stepped out into the waiting noise of the world. He felt no triumph, only momentum. Behind them, high above the street systems, designed to appear neutral, had begun to crack. By noon, the building had changed its posture. Hartwell Analytics still gleamed, still hummed with productivity, but something beneath the polish had tightened. Malik felt it as he stepped back onto the 32nd floor with a temporary badge that now drew longer looks. Word traveled faster than data. It always did. People leaned in closer to their screens, lowered their voices, recalibrated what they thought they knew about the man who had sat at a workstation and exposed the math no one wanted named. Evelyn moved through the space like a current. She didn't rush, but she didn't linger either. The order to freeze the model had gone out less than an hour earlier, and already the consequences were arriving in waves. Legal counsel requested meetings. Product managers flagged timelines. A vice president sent an email that began with respectfully and ended with an unspoken threat. Evelyn read them all, without replying, her attention fixed on the task she had postponed for too long. Malik waited near the glass wall, overlooking the city, hands clasped behind his back, watching traffic trace familiar routes far below. He felt the pull of old instincts, the urge to retreat once the work was done, to leave the aftermath to people paid to absorb it. But this wasn't finished. He knew that as surely as he knew the weight of the binder on his shelf back home. Graham Weller approached without announcement. He stopped a careful distance away, his expression composed in the way men learned when they intended to win without appearing to fight. We need to talk, he said. So do I, Malik replied. Graham's eyes flicked toward Evelyn, then back. Not like this. This is exactly how Malik said. In the open. Graham inhaled through his nose. You forced our hand. Investors are asking questions we can't answer yet. Regulators will follow. Good, Malik said. Graham's jaw tightened. You think this is justice? It's chaos. No, Malik replied. It's accountability catching up. Evelyn joined them, her presence shifting the air. What do you want, Graham? A pause, he said. A statement. Something to stabilize the situation. We frame this as a proactive audit. We control the narrative. We don't control it, Evelyn said. We tell the truth. Graham's smile was brittle. Truth is a luxury. Evelyn met his gaze. So is denial. And we've spent enough on it. She turned away, signaling the conversation's end. Graham lingered a moment, then walked off, his shoulders rigid. Malik watched him go, noting the speed of his steps, the tension he tried and failed to disguise. Pressure revealed character, the way heat revealed fractures. They convened in a smaller conference room an hour later. Legal counsel dialed in. Compliance joined from another floor. A risk analyst spoke too quickly, her words tripping over each other as she tried to explain away patterns that had already been named. Malik listened without interrupting, tracking the evasions. He had heard them all before, just dressed in different language. This variable, he said when there was a pause, isn't neutral. It never was. A lawyer cleared his throat. We need to be careful about language. We need to be accurate, Malik replied. Accuracy is safer than caution. Evelyn nodded. Prepare the disclosure. Full scope. No spin. A beat of silence followed. Then compliance said, understood. The meeting ended without relief. That was how Malik knew they were finally doing something real. In the afternoon, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a number she recognized. She stepped into a quiet corridor to answer it. Ava. I don't feel good, her daughter said. The voice was flat, practiced. A defense. What happened? They showed a video, Ava said. At lunch. Some kids. They said you were buying someone. They said he was dangerous. Evelyn closed her eyes. I'm so sorry. Is it true? Ava asked. Are you doing this because you feel bad? The question cut cleanly. Evelyn chose her words with care. I'm doing this because it's right, she said. And because when we know something is wrong, we don't look away. A pause. They said you'll lose everything. Evelyn leaned against the wall. Some things are worth more than keeping everything the same. Ava didn't answer. The line went quiet, then disconnected. Evelyn stood there for a moment longer than necessary, absorbing the cost she had invited into her daughter's life. Then she straightened and returned to the room. Malik saw her face and understood without explanation. He had grown up learning how consequences spilled outward, how they found the people least equipped to carry them. He felt the old anger stir, tempered now by something steadier. They'll come after you through her, he said quietly as they walked back toward the elevator. They already are, Evelyn replied. I won't let it stop me, good, Malik said, because they won't stop with that. Outside, the press waited again, thinner now, but sharper. Malik didn't slow. He had said what he needed to say for the moment. The rest would come in documents, in courtrooms, not sound bites. As evening approached, Malik returned to the building alone. He had asked for access to archived data sets, older versions of the model, the ones built before the IPO. Pressure had calcified decisions into doctrine. A junior engineer let him in without comment, eyes bright with something like relief. Not everyone wanted the lie to hold. Hours passed. Malik worked through layers of code and policy, tracing the lineage of bias like a family tree. Names appeared. Decisions logged. Meetings referenced. The system hadn't failed. It had done exactly what it was taught to do. At one point, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Back off while you can. He deleted it without replying. He had learned long ago that threats were admissions wearing bravado. Near midnight, Evelyn returned, coat over her arm, exhaustion etched into her posture. She watched him work for a moment before speaking. You don't have to do this tonight. Yes, Malik said. I do. She nodded and took a seat across from him. What are you finding? That the bias wasn't accidental, Malik replied. It was profitable. Evelyn exhaled. Then we'll have to unlearn it. Unlearning hurts, Malik said. People cling to what feeds them. I know, she said. I built this place. They sat in silence for a while, the city dark beyond the glass. Somewhere inside the system, the first official inquiry request landed time-stamped and irreversible. Malik felt the weight of it settle, not as fear, but as alignment. This was the middle of it now. The part where patterns turned into proof, and proof demanded consequences. Justice isn't blind, he thought again. It just chooses who to see. Tonight, at least, it was beginning to look. The first official request to reopen Darius Johnson's case arrived without ceremony. It didn't announce itself with urgency or apology. It came as a scanned PDF forwarded from a public defender's office in Suffolk County. Its language cautious, procedural, hedged with conditions. Malik read it twice at the small kitchen table in his apartment, the same place where letters from prison had been unfolded and refolded until the creases felt permanent. He knew better than to mistake motion for progress. Systems had a way of moving just enough to convince people to stop pushing. He took the bus to the courthouse the next morning, sitting near the back, watching the city roll past through streaked windows. Boston looked different when you weren't trying to impress it. Brick and concrete, old scars patched over history, layered so thick it became invisible. The courthouse itself rose heavy and square, a structure designed to outlast doubt. Malik stepped inside and felt the familiar chill settle into his bones. The air smelled like paper and disinfectant and something else harder to name, resignation maybe. The clerk at the counter glanced at his paperwork and then at him. "You'll need to wait," she said, already turning away. "How long?" Malik asked. She shrugged. "Depends." He took a seat along the wall, the bench worn smooth by decades of waiting bodies. Around him, conversations murmured in low tones. A mother argued quietly with a lawyer. A man in a work jacket stared at the floor, hands clasped too tight. Malik recognized the posture. Hope held carefully, like something fragile and easily dropped. Hours passed. At noon, a young assistant district attorney appeared, her expression professional but distant. She introduced herself, mispronounced Darius's name, corrected it, then moved on. "We're reviewing the file," she said. "There are complexities." "There were complexities 6 years ago," Malik replied. "They didn't stop you then?" She flinched just slightly. "We have to follow process." "Process didn't save him," Malik said. She nodded as if acknowledging a point she wasn't prepared to act on. "We'll be in touch." Outside, the sun felt harsh after the fluorescent interior. Malik stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, breathing in the noise of the city. He checked his phone. 3 missed calls, 1 voicemail. He listened to it once, then again. It was from Ava's school. Evelyn sat in the principal's office, and an hour later, her posture rigid, hands folded in her lap, the way she had learned to do in boardrooms when she wanted to project calm. Ava sat beside her shoulders, hunched eyes fixed on the floor. Across from them, the principal spoke in measured tones about incidents and concerns and the importance of a supportive environment. "They said he was a criminal," Ava said suddenly, her voice small but sharp. "They said my mom was stupid. They said she was pretending." The words hung in the air, heavier than accusation. Evelyn felt something crack inside her, a controlled fracture she didn't allow to show. "Who said this?" she asked. Ava shrugged. "Everyone." The principal cleared her throat. "Children repeat what they hear at home." Evelyn nodded. She understood that too well. "What are you doing to address it?" "We're speaking with the students involved," the principal said. "But you have to understand, this is a high-profile situation. Feelings are running high." "So are consequences," Evelyn replied. Her voice remained even, but there was steel beneath it. "My daughter will not be made to carry the weight of adults' failures." Ava finally looked up. "Are you going to stop?" she asked. "If I ask you to?" Evelyn met her gaze. This was the moment she had been dreading, the one no amount of preparation could soften. "I can't," she said gently. "Not because I don't care about you. Because I do." Ava swallowed. Then, "Don't pretend this is about love," she said. "It hurts too much." The words stayed with Evelyn long after they left the office. Malik noticed the car 2 days later, a gray sedan parked across from his building when he left for work, idling too long. He dismissed it at first. Cities were full of coincidences. But when it appeared again that evening, then again the next morning, something tightened in his chest. He changed his route, doubled back once, watched the sedan adjust. Subtle, careful, professional. He didn't tell Evelyn right away. He didn't want to become another problem she had to manage. Instead, he leaned into the work. He requested archived police logs related to the warehouse fire older than what had been presented at trial. He visited the neighborhood where it had happened, walking the perimeter, talking to people who remembered smoke and sirens and questions that never came. An elderly man at a corner diner recognized Darius's name. "Good kid," he said. "Wrong night. Did you see anything?" Malik asked. The man hesitated, then shook his head. "I saw them decide," he said. "That's all." That night, Malik found an inconsistency buried deep in a maintenance report, a security camera that had been logged as malfunctioning, but showed signs of manual override. The timestamp didn't match the fire report. It was small. Easy to miss. Exactly the kind of thing that slipped through when no one bothered to look. He copied the file, backed it up twice, and sent a secure message to the public defender. Then he sat back and waited. The call came after midnight. A blocked number. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," a man's voice said. "Justice usually is," Malik replied. A pause. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who," Malik said, and hung up. Across the city, Evelyn sat alone in her office. Lights dimmed, the city spread out beneath her, like a map of unresolved debts. She reread the internal memos, the legal opinions, the carefully worded warnings. She thought of Ava's face, tight with a pain she had invited. She thought of Malik walking streets that now watched him too closely. Her phone buzzed. A message from Malik, brief and precise. "I'm being followed. I found something in the fire case. It matters." Evelyn closed her eyes. The line they had crossed was no longer theoretical. It had shape and weight and teeth. She typed back, "We don't stop. We document everything. I'll make calls." Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the small truths surfacing beneath its weight. Inside, systems built to forget names were being remembered. And somewhere between the courthouse bench and a school hallway, the cost of reopening a case no one wanted reopened was becoming impossible to ignore. By the end of the week, the pressure stopped pretending to be subtle. It arrived in emails marked urgent, in calendar invitations, sent and rescinded in voices that softened, even as the message hardened. Hartwell Analytics was still operating, still profitable, but its center of gravity had shifted. What had once been a machine designed to optimize outcomes was now busy protecting itself. Evelyn felt it most clearly in the silences. People who used to call without hesitation now routed their concerns through assistants. Partners postponed meetings indefinitely. A senator she had once advised declined a scheduled appearance with a vague note about optics. The word followed her everywhere, spoken and unspoken, as if it were a diagnosis. Optics. As though the harm were not real unless it looked real to the right audience. She sat at the head of the boardroom table, listening as Graham Weller presented revised projections. His voice was calm, measured, practiced. He spoke of volatility and mitigation, of stakeholder confidence and long-term strategy. He did not mention Malik's name. He did not mention Darius Johnson. The omissions were deliberate. "If we pause the disclosure," Graham said, clicking to the next slide, "we can regain control of the narrative. We buy time. We let the investigation run its course quietly." "And if we don't?" Evelyn asked. Graham met her gaze. "Then we risk everything. Lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny, a collapse of trust." Evelyn leaned back in her chair. Trust doesn't collapse because of truth, she said. It collapses because of lies. A murmur ran around the table. Graham closed the presentation. You're asking this company to bleed for a principle. I'm asking it to heal, Evelyn replied. Healing, she had learned, was disruptive. It required reopening wounds that had been sealed poorly, allowing infection to be seen rather than ignored. She could feel the resistance coalescing, the quiet consensus forming against her. This was the cost of standing still when everyone else wanted to retreat. Outside the building, Malik adjusted his route again. He took different streets, entered through different doors. He didn't run, but he didn't linger either. The gray sedan appeared twice that day, once near the courthouse, once near the diner. He noted the license plate, the driver's posture, the way the car idled without urgency. Whoever they weren't there to scare him into silence. They were there to remind him that he was being watched. He met with the public defender in a cramped office that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. She listened carefully as Malik laid out the new findings, the mismatched timestamps, the manual override. She nodded, her pen moving steadily. This helps, she said. But it won't be enough on its own. What will, Malik asked. Pressure, she replied. And time. Malik smiled without humor. Those are the two things they don't want to give us. As he left the office, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, different from the last. This one was shorter. You're not as smart as you think. He deleted it and kept walking. That evening, Evelyn returned home later than usual. Ava sat at the kitchen counter, homework spread out, but untouched. She didn't look up when Evelyn entered. We need to talk, Ava said. Evelyn set her bag down. Okay. Ava's voice was steady, too steady. They moved me to a different class. I know, Evelyn said. I agreed to it. Why, Ava asked. So I don't have to hear what they say about him. So you don't have to hear what they say about you, Evelyn replied. Ava finally looked up. It feels like hiding. Evelyn sat across from her. Sometimes distance isn't hiding, she said. It's protection. Ava shook her head. You always say that when you don't want to say you're scared. The words landed with precision. Evelyn considered denying them, then didn't. I am scared, she said. But I'm not wrong. Ava studied her, searching for something. Is he worth it? She asked. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She thought of Malik's calm refusal to be diminished, of the way he spoke about systems, as if they were choices, not fate. She thought of the numbers she could no longer unsee. This isn't about him, she said finally. It's about what we stand for. Ava nodded slowly. Then don't make me stand alone. Evelyn reached across the counter and took her daughter's hand. You won't, she promised. Later that night, Evelyn's phone rang. It was Graham. She considered letting it go to voicemail, then answered. What is it? There's talk of a vote, he said. No confidence. They're saying you've lost perspective. And you? She asked. A pause. I'm saying you're asking people to sacrifice for a man they don't know. Evelyn's voice hardened. They've been sacrificing people they don't know for years. This is just the first time they've been asked to notice. Graham exhaled. You're isolating yourself? No, she said. I'm finding out who was never here. She hung up and stared at the dark window. Her reflection looked unfamiliar, sharper around the edges, less insulated. She felt the cost accumulating, a ledger she could no longer ignore. Across the city, Malik sat in his apartment, the binder open on the table, new documents added to old ones. He thought of Evelyn, facing her own kind of surveillance of Ava, navigating hallways that no longer felt safe. He thought of Darius waiting. His phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn. They're pushing for a vote. If they remove me, this gets harder. Malik typed back. Then we make it louder. Not reckless. Just impossible to bury. He set the phone down and leaned back, the chair creaking under him. This was the part people misunderstood. The slow constriction. The way opposition gathered not in shouts, but in quiet alignments. He felt no urge to retreat. Fear had lost its leverage. Outside, the city lights flickered on, indifferent and watchful. Inside boardrooms and classrooms and apartments, lines were being drawn. The cost of standing beside him was no longer abstract. It was personal. And for the first time since the warehouse burned, Malik allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the system had underestimated how much people were willing to lose to tell the truth. The arrest came on a Tuesday, ordinary enough to feel deliberate. Malik was leaving the courthouse after dropping off supplemental documents when two officers stepped into his path. Their movements practiced polite. One of them asked his name as if it were a courtesy. The other already had his hand near the radio. Malik Johnson, he said. Yes, Malik replied. He didn't ask why. He had learned that questions rarely changed outcomes at moments like this. You're being detained in connection with an unauthorized access of proprietary systems, the first officer said. You have the right to remain silent. Malik nodded once. He handed over his phone without resistance, watching as it was placed into an evidence bag. The courthouse doors closed behind him, the sound final in a way that had nothing to do with volume. A few people stopped to watch. Most didn't. He was guided toward the waiting cruiser, the city continuing around them, as if this were just another necessary adjustment. At Hartwell Analytics, the news arrived mid-morning. Evelyn was in her office, reading through a draft disclosure that had already been softened more than she liked when her assistant knocked without waiting for an answer. The look on her face said enough. They've taken him, the assistant said quietly. Evelyn stood so fast her chair slid back. On what grounds computer fraud? The assistant replied. They're saying he accessed restricted systems. He had permission, Evelyn said. I gave it. The warrant doesn't mention that. Evelyn grabbed her coat and phone, already dialing legal counsel. The line rang, then went to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She called again, then again. When she finally reached someone, the response was careful, rehearsed. We need time, they said. We need to assess exposure. He's being made an example, Evelyn replied. You assess whatever you want. I'm going to the station. By the time she arrived, the story had already begun to spread. Headlines framed Malik as a hacker, a grifter, a man who had overreached. Commentators debated whether he had manipulated a vulnerable executive. The narrative hardened quickly, eager to simplify what had never been simple. Malik sat in a small room with a metal table bolted to the floor, his hands uncuffed but empty. He stared at the scuffed surface and thought of Darius sitting in a similar room years ago, confusion giving way to something quieter and more dangerous. He had told himself this would hurt. He had not told himself it would feel so familiar. An officer opened the door. Your lawyer's on the way. Which one? Malik asked. The officer shrugged. The one who answered. Evelyn arrived too late to stop the intake, too early to hide the damage. She spoke to the desk sergeant, then to a supervisor, then to a man in a suit who introduced himself without warmth. The words blended together: procedure, protocol, investigation. Each one a small wall. When she finally saw Malik through the glass, she felt the full weight of what she had brought into his life. He looked tired but not surprised. That hurt more than anger would have. I told you this would get ugly, he said through the phone. I'm getting you out, Evelyn replied. Not today, Malik said. And maybe not the way you think. She pressed her free hand against the glass, resisting the urge to apologize. Apologies were easy. They changed nothing. "They're trying to bury the case," she said. "They froze the review this morning. The DA's office says new evidence needs verification." Malik nodded. "That was always the play. They're calling for a board vote," Evelyn added. "No confidence. Graham's leading it." That earned a flicker of something in Malik's eyes. Recognition. "Then they'll move fast," he said, "before the record settles." "You don't have to protect me," Evelyn said. "I'm not," Malik replied. "I'm protecting the work." Hours later, as Malik was transferred to holding, Evelyn sat in her car outside the station phone, pressed to her ear. The board call was already underway. Voices overlapped, tense and urgent. Graham spoke with controlled concern, framing the arrest as a regrettable but necessary separation. "This company cannot afford to be associated with criminal behavior," he said. "We need stability. We need leadership unclouded by personal entanglements." Evelyn listened without interrupting. When it was her turn, she spoke plainly. "You're abandoning due process because it's inconvenient," she said. "And you're doing it to protect yourselves." "This is about fiduciary duty," Graham replied. "This is about fear," Evelyn said. "And I won't pretend otherwise." The vote was called. Names were read. Responses tallied. When it was over, the result was decisive. Evelyn Hart was removed as CEO of Hartwell Analytics, effective immediately. She ended the call and sat in silence, the engine off the city humming around her. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't read. She thought of Ava, of the promise she had made not to let her stand alone. She thought of Malik behind glass, absorbing consequences meant to teach obedience. Malik learned of the vote from a public defender who looked at him with something like respect. "They moved fast," she said. "You rattled the right cages." "That wasn't the goal," Malik replied. "It rarely is," she said. "But it works." Later that night, Malik was released on bail, the conditions strict, the warnings explicit. As he stepped out into the cool air, Evelyn was there leaning against the car, her posture composed in a way that suggested effort. "They took it," she said. "The job, the title, all of it." Malik studied her face, the absence of insulation. "Are you okay?" She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "No," she said. "But I'm clear." They stood there, the distance between them smaller now, stripped of pretense. The world had done its worst, or close enough to it. "I didn't ask you to save me," Malik said quietly, echoing words he had spoken before. "And I won't let you lose everything for my sake." Evelyn met his gaze. "I didn't lose it for you," she replied. "I lost it because I refused to lie." For a moment, the night held them in a fragile truce. Then Malik stepped back. "This is where it gets harder," he said. "They'll come after the case next." "They can try," Evelyn replied. As they drove away from the station, the city lights blurring past, Malik felt the full weight of the moment settle. This was the bottom of it, the place where everything seemed lost, where the system closed ranks and declared itself victorious. He closed his eyes briefly, not in despair, but in focus. All was lost, they wanted him to believe. But he knew better now. Loss was only the beginning of the reckoning. The morning after the vote felt unnaturally quiet, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Evelyn woke before dawn in the townhouse she no longer knew how to inhabit. The phone beside her bed was silent for the first time in weeks. No alerts, no calendar reminders, no expectations waiting to be managed. She lay there for several minutes, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality settle without resistance. This was the part no one prepared you for, the absence of noise after a fall. She rose, showered, dressed simply. No tailored jacket, no badge clipped to her coat. When she entered the kitchen, Ava was already there, cereal untouched, eyes sharp with a maturity that had arrived too soon. "They said you don't work there anymore," Ava said, not looking up. "That's true," Evelyn replied. Ava nodded once. "Are we in trouble?" Evelyn crossed the room and knelt, so they were eye level. "We're not in danger," she said. "But things will be different." "Because of him?" Ava asked. "Because of the truth," Evelyn answered. "Sometimes the truth costs people more than they expect." Ava studied her face, searching for hesitation. Finding none, she sighed and pushed the bowl away. "Then don't stop now," she said. "It would be worse." Evelyn held that moment close as she left the house an hour later. Not for an office, but for a small law firm near the river that had agreed to meet her quietly. Inside, the air smelled like old books and determination. The attorneys listened as Evelyn laid out what she knew, what she could still access, what she was willing to testify to under oath. They asked careful questions. They took notes. When she finished, one of them nodded slowly. "If you're serious," he said, "this won't be quick." "I know," Evelyn replied. "It has to be clean." Across the city, Malik reported for his bail check-in, the process efficient and impersonal. His phone had been returned with restrictions. No contact with Hartwell systems. No unsupervised communication with witnesses. The boundaries were clear, designed to contain him. He accepted them without protest. Containment had never stopped truth from moving. It just changed its routes. Back in his apartment, Malik spread papers across the table, the binder open again. He wasn't looking for new evidence now. He was organizing what he already had, mapping connections, timelines, patterns of omission. He thought of it not as building a case, but as telling a story that refused to be edited down. His phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn. "I'm meeting with federal counsel. DOJ is listening. It's slow, but it's real." Malik read it twice, then typed back. "Then we hold steady, no shortcuts." That afternoon, the first real crack appeared. A junior engineer from Hartwell reached out through an encrypted channel Malik had shared weeks earlier. The message was brief. "I can't do this anymore. I saved copies before they locked us out." The files arrived in pieces, carefully transmitted, each one another brick, removed from the wall. Internal emails. Meeting notes. A risk assessment labeled confidential that explicitly referenced profitability tied to demographic risk concentration. Malik stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. This was no longer negligence. It was intent. He forwarded the materials to the public defender, then to the attorneys Evelyn had retained, keeping a copy offline. Documentation was survival. By evening, the news cycle shifted. A small outlet ran a cautious piece questioning the timing of Malik's arrest relative to the disclosure freeze. It didn't accuse. It asked questions. That was enough. Others followed, emboldened by the absence of immediate retaliation. The narrative began to fracture. Evelyn watched it unfold from her living room, Ava beside her on the couch, homework spread out between them. The television played quietly, commentators speaking in restrained tones about whistleblowers and accountability. Ava glanced up. "They're saying your company did bad things," she said. "They're saying it might have," Evelyn replied. "And they're finally looking." Ava nodded, absorbing the nuance. "Good." Later, Evelyn drove to Malik's apartment. She didn't announce herself. She knocked and waited. When he opened the door, he looked tired, but centered, like someone who had stopped fighting the ground beneath his feet. "I won't stay long," she said. "You don't have to," Malik replied, stepping aside. They sat at the table amid the papers. Evelyn took it all in without comment. The work, the patience, the refusal to dramatize what mattered. "They're calling this a crisis," she said. "It is," Malik replied, "for them." She leaned back, considering. I want to testify, she said. Publicly, under oath, everything I knew and when I knew it. Malik studied her, weighing the cost she was still choosing to pay. They'll try to discredit you. I know. They'll say you're bitter. Reckless. I am reckless, Evelyn said. With the truth. He nodded once, then do it soon, before they close ranks again. As she left, Malik stood at the window, watching her walk away, no entourage, no armor. He thought of Darius, of the years stolen by silence. He thought of the system tightening its grip, then loosening just enough to betray fear. That night, Malik wrote a letter not to a court, but to himself. He wrote about the moment everything collapsed and the strange clarity that followed. He wrote about the difference between being saved and being seen. He folded the letter and placed it in the binder not as evidence, but as anchor. The crisis had arrived full and undeniable. But beneath it, something steadier had taken root. Truth, once released, did not require permission to move. And for the first time since the warehouse burned, Malik felt the system falter. Not because it had grown kind, but because it had finally been forced to look at what it had done. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, chosen less for symbolism than for availability, but it carried weight all the same. Malik arrived early, dressed plainly the way he always did when he wanted nothing to distract from what mattered. The federal building loomed pale against the sky, its steps worn by decades of arguments that had changed lives quietly, without ceremony. He paused at the bottom, breathing in, letting the moment settle. This was not vindication. It was process catching up. Inside, the room filled slowly. Reporters took seats along the back wall, notebooks ready, voices subdued. Lawyers clustered in low conversations, the language of caution and strategy threading through the air. Malik took his place beside the public defender, hands, folded, posture steady. He thought of Darius, sitting miles away, waiting for updates filtered through channels that had failed him before. He thought of the letter he hadn't answered yet, the one that asked for reality instead of comfort. Evelyn entered without fanfare. No title preceded her name now. No assistants clearing space. She took a seat behind Malik, close enough to signal alignment, far enough to respect his lead. When she caught his eye, she nodded once. He returned it. Nothing more was needed. The proceedings began with formalities, words stacked carefully to create distance from consequence. Then the evidence was introduced. Not all at once, piece by piece, emails projected onto screens. Internal memos read into the record. Timelines laid out with precision that left little room for interpretation. Malik listened as if he were hearing someone else's life describe the patterns he had traced, now rendered undeniable by their own authorship. When Evelyn was called to testify, the room shifted. Cameras angled forward. Pens paused mid-sentence. She walked to the stand with measured steps, her expression composed but unguarded. She answered questions directly without embellishment. She spoke of what she knew, and when she knew it, of the moment the numbers stopped making sense of the choice to act instead of defer. When asked why she hadn't acted sooner, she didn't deflect. I believe the system corrected itself, she said. I was wrong. The admission carried through the room heavier than any accusation. She spoke of Malik's access, of her explicit authorization, of the absence of intent to deceive. When the opposing counsel tried to frame her actions as reckless, she met the challenge without heat. Recklessness would have been staying silent, she said. This was responsibility. The focus returned to the warehouse fire. The maintenance report Malik had flagged was displayed, the discrepancy now undeniable. An expert witness explained the significance of the manual override, the improbability of coincidence. A former contractor testified under oath, voice shaking, confirming pressure to close the case quickly. The words fell into place one after another, building a structure that could not be dismissed as narrative. The judge listened without interruption. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled. "The conviction is vacated," she said. "Pending further review, the defendant is released." Malik felt the words register before he felt anything else. Vacated. Released. They were procedural terms, but they landed like air returning to a room that had been sealed too long. He closed his eyes briefly, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. This was not the end. It was the correction of a wrong that should never have required courage to admit. Outside, the press surged, questions, overlapping microphones extended. Malik stopped at the top of the steps. He raised a hand, not for silence, but for patience. "My brother lost years he can't get back," he said. "This doesn't make us whole. It makes us honest. There's a difference." Someone asked about Hartwell Analytics. Malik shook his head. "Today isn't about companies," he said. "It's about people." Darius walked out an hour later, thinner than Malik remembered, eyes adjusting to the light. The brothers stood facing each other. For a long moment, the space between them charged with everything that hadn't been said. Then Malik stepped forward and wrapped his arms around him, careful and firm. Darius laughed once, a sound edged with disbelief. "You're late," he said. Malik smiled, the tension breaking. "Traffic." They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. Some truths were better carried quietly. In the days that followed, consequences spread. Federal investigators expanded their inquiry. Names surfaced. Graham Weller resigned amid mounting scrutiny, his departure framed as personal, but understood as inevitable. Hartwell's board issued statements that acknowledged failures without naming intent. Lawsuits followed. So did reforms, some sincere, some cosmetic. It was the nature of institutions to resist full accountability. Malik understood that. He didn't need perfection. He needed movement. Evelyn watched from a distance as the company she had built redefined itself without her. It hurt in unexpected ways, like an old injury flaring in cold weather. But the pain was clean. It didn't carry shame. She spent her days meeting with advocates, attorneys, families whose stories mirrored Darius's in different details. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was without the insulation of position. Ava returned to school with a steadier stride. The whispers hadn't vanished, but they had softened, reframed by facts that were harder to distort. One afternoon, she told Evelyn about a classmate who had apologized, awkward and sincere. Evelyn listened, letting her daughter lead the meaning-making. Growth, she had learned, rarely announced itself. On a quiet evening, Malik and Evelyn sat on the steps outside his building, the city cooling around them. No cameras, no urgency. Just the low hum of ordinary life resuming. "They'll call this a win," Evelyn said. "They'll call it a correction," Malik replied. "Wins make people complacent." She nodded. What happens next? Malik considered the question. He thought of the binder, now lighter with purpose, of the letters that would still come, of the work that didn't end when a name was cleared. Next, he said, we build something that doesn't need to be dramatic to matter. Evelyn smiled, small and genuine. Quiet justice, she said. Quiet, Malik agreed. But not invisible. They sat there as the sky darkened the city, breathing around them. Names had been cleared. Truth had been spoken. The reckoning had arrived, not with spectacle, but with persistence. And in the space left behind, something steadier took hold, a future shaped not by who had power, but by who had finally been forced to look. The months that followed did not unfold like a victory lap. There were no clean edges, no clear return to normal. Life resumed the way it always did after something fundamental shifted slowly, unevenly, carrying echoes of what had been lost and what had been refused. Malik moved first not geographically, but inward. He stopped measuring days by court dates and hearings and began measuring them by quieter markers, the way Darius laughed too loudly at nothing, as if testing the sound of freedom. The way sleep came easier some nights and not at all on others. The way the binder on the shelf grew thinner as its contents were archived, transformed from burden into record. Malik did not frame what had happened as redemption. Redemption implied debt paid in full. This felt more like alignment, a long-delayed correction that left scars intact. The Second Chance Justice Fund took shape without ceremony. No gala, no naming rights, just a rented office with mismatched chairs and a printer that jammed too often. Malik insisted on that. The work mattered more than the story about the work. Evelyn agreed, even when donors pressed for visibility, even when journalists asked why she wasn't attaching her name. "Because it isn't about me," she said, and meant it. She sat in on meetings, listened to families whose losses mirrored Darius's in structure, if not detail, and learned to speak less. Influence, she discovered, could be quieter and still be effective. Ava adjusted in ways Evelyn hadn't anticipated. She didn't grow louder or braver in the obvious sense. Instead, she grew steadier. She volunteered at the fund's office on weekends, organizing files, bringing snacks, listening without comment. One afternoon, she asked Malik why people believed lies so easily. He thought for a long moment before answering. "Because lies are simpler," he said. "And because truth asks something back." Ava nodded, satisfied not with comfort, but with honesty. Evelyn's life rearranged itself around absence. No board meetings, no private drivers, no calendar packed months ahead. At first, the quiet unsettled her. Then it taught her things. She cooked more badly at first, then better. She walked instead of being driven. She learned which neighbors noticed and which didn't. She stopped thinking of loss as subtraction and began understanding it as exposure of priorities, of character, of what remained when power no longer smoothed the path. She and Malik did not rush to define what they were. That restraint mattered. Their connection had been forged in consequence, not romance, and neither of them mistook intensity for intimacy. They talked often, sometimes about the work, sometimes not at all. They shared meals. They shared silences. On certain evenings when the city cooled and the noise receded, they walked without destination, two people no longer pretending to be untouched by each other's gravity. The question of marriage returned not as spectacle, but as consideration. It surfaced one night as they sat on Malik's small balcony, the city lights below steady and indifferent. "We don't owe anyone a story," Evelyn said. "Especially not the one they expect." "I know," Malik replied. "If we choose it, it has to be ours. Quiet, unborrowed." They let that sit. Weeks passed. Nothing shifted outwardly. Everything shifted internally. The day they chose was unremarkable by design. No audience, no announcement. A courthouse clerk who smiled politely, asked for signatures, stamped the papers, and moved on to the next file. Darius stood beside Malik, hands clasped, eyes bright with something like peace. Ava watched from a bench, her expression thoughtful, then approving. When it was done, Malik took Evelyn's hand not as a declaration, but as a continuation. Later, they ate sandwiches from a corner shop sitting on the steps outside the city, flowing around them. No one noticed. That felt right. The fund grew, slowly. Cases reopened. Some ended well, some didn't. Malik never promised outcomes. He promised effort, transparency, refusal to disappear. That proved enough for many. Evelyn found her voice in testimony and teaching, speaking to rooms full of people who wanted formulas where there were only principles. Justice doesn't reward intention, she told them. It responds to persistence. Years later, when asked about the moment everything changed, Malik didn't mention the parking lot, or the cameras, or the kneeling figure that had frozen a city's attention. He spoke instead about a maintenance report that didn't match a timestamp about a question that wouldn't let go about the cost of choosing to see. The system didn't break, he said once. It was revealed. There's a difference. On an ordinary evening long after the headlines had moved on, Malik and Evelyn stood at the window of their shared home, watching lights blink on across the city. Ava read nearby feet tucked under her content. The future no longer felt like something to outrun or control. It felt like work, ongoing, imperfect, necessary. Justice Malik had learned rarely announced itself. It didn't arrive with certainty or applause. It arrived quietly when someone refused to look away and someone else chose to stand beside them without conditions. Sometimes it simply refused to disappear. The human lesson of this story is that justice does not begin with power, wealth, or good intentions. It begins with the courage to see clearly and to stay present when the cost becomes personal. True moral change is not loud or heroic in appearance. It is often quiet, uncomfortable, and isolating. The story reminds us that love is not proven by rescue or sacrifice alone, but by standing beside someone without control, without ownership, and without retreat when the system pushes back. In a world that rewards silence and convenience, the most meaningful act is to refuse to look away, because lasting justice is built not by grand gestures, but by persistence, honesty, and the willingness to accept loss in order to protect another person's dignity.